Where are you watching from? The rugged mountains of Afghanistan have stood as silent witnesses to the march of empires, the clash of armies, and the dreams of conquerors. Long before modern maps defined borders, this land steeped in deserts, high passes, and river valleys was a prize that no outsider could fully hold. Its terrain is merciless, its winters bitter, and its people fiercely protective of their freedom. From the very first footsteps of ancient invaders, Afghanistan earned a reputation that would follow it through centuries. The invincible frontier, the land that defied the mighty. For centuries, empires have been drawn to Afghanistan like moths to a flame. Persians, Greeks, Mauryans, Kushanas, and later the great Islamic caliphates. Each believed they could tame this land, yet each eventually learned the harsh lesson: to conquer Afghanistan is to court defeat. The geography alone, with jagged peaks, narrow passes, and hidden valleys, favored defenders over invaders. Armies that marched in with confidence often found themselves trapped, starving, or retreating into chaos. By the 19th century, Afghanistan became more than just a land of mountains and deserts. It was a pivot of global power struggles. The British Empire, expanding its influence in the Indian subcontinent, viewed Afghanistan as the gateway to Central Asia and a buffer against Russian ambitions. The so-called Great Game had begun, a silent war of spies, diplomacy, and intrigue. Yet it was the land itself that posed the greatest challenge. British envoys and generals discovered that treaties and armies were often useless in the face of Afghan resolve. Local tribes, organized in small autonomous units, knew every valley, cave, and ridge. They could vanish into the mountains like smoke, reappearing to strike when least expected. The stories of early campaigns read like cautionary tales. Marches that began with pomp and confidence ended in disaster. Supply lines stretched thin. Harsh winters decimated troops, and disease claimed more lives than battle. One could see, even then, why this land would earn the title ****, the graveyard of empires. Yet, despite repeated failures, outsiders continued to arrive, each believing that strategy, technology, or sheer force could overcome centuries of resistance. Afghanistan's cultural fabric was as complex as its terrain. A mosaic of Pashtuns, Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, and other communities, each fiercely loyal to their own codes, customs, and clans. Unity for outsiders was nearly impossible. Alliances shifted. Loyalties were local, and outsiders were rarely trusted. Even in times of peace, the Afghan people demonstrated resilience that was not easily subdued by promises of wealth or threats of punishment. It was a society built on endurance, adaptability, and an unyielding sense of identity. As the 19th century progressed, British influence collided with local autonomy. The Anglo-Afghan Wars III in total tested the might of an empire used to controlling vast territories. The First Anglo-Afghan War, 1839 to 1842, ended in catastrophe for the British. Kabul, once thought to be secure under British supervision, became a trap. An entire army, thousands strong, was decimated during a retreat through snowbound mountain passes. Only a handful survived to tell the tale. The lesson was brutal and clear. Afghanistan could not be conquered by foreign might alone. Yet the story of Part 1 is not merely one of failure. It is also a story of endurance, of a land whose people valued freedom above all. The Afghans, unbowed by foreign armies, maintained their way of life, their customs, and their autonomy. Their struggle against invaders was not simply about territory. It was a defense of identity, a commitment to sovereignty, and an unwavering determination to shape their destiny regardless of outside pressures. Even today, as we reflect on these events, the mountains and valleys of Afghanistan seem to whisper tales of valor, resistance, and resilience. They remind the world that true conquest requires more than armies and treaties. It demands understanding, respect, and often humility. For centuries, empires have come, fought, and left. Afghanistan remains an unbroken frontier, shaping the course of history as much as any army or diplomat ever could. The stage is set for centuries of further struggle, the rise and fall of dynasties, invasions by world powers, and the relentless courage of those who call this land home. In Part 1, we have merely glimpsed the opening chapter of a story that spans millennia. A story that explains why Afghanistan is forever remembered as the *** graveyard of empires ***. The British Empire had long prided itself on its military prowess, confident that discipline, numbers, and technology could overcome any obstacle. Yet, in the rugged land of Afghanistan, these assumptions were about to be tested as never before. The 19th century's second half brought the Second Anglo-Afghan War, a campaign meant to solidify British influence and prevent the ever-looming advance of Russian power into Central Asia. From the outset, the challenges were monumental. Afghanistan's terrain had not changed, and its people remained just as determined. Mountain passes twisted like serpents, rivers cut deep through valleys, and harsh winters claimed as many victims as any battlefield. British generals, accustomed to open plains and predictable supply lines, found themselves navigating treacherous passes with small convoys, vulnerable to ambushes at every turn. Yet they pressed on, driven by imperial ambitions and a belief in the inevitability of their success. Local tribes, organized in intricate networks of loyalty and custom, employed guerrilla tactics with devastating effect. Night raids, sudden strikes from hidden ridges, and the disappearance of fighters into the mountains frustrated conventional strategies. Every attempt to occupy towns or enforce treaties was met with resistance, subtle sabotage, and a complexity that no map could capture. It became painfully clear that Afghanistan's defense was not merely geographical, but deeply rooted in its social and cultural fabric. Diplomacy, too, proved a precarious endeavor. British envoys attempted to negotiate with tribal leaders, offering protection, trade, and recognition. Some agreements were made, only to be broken when circumstances shifted or when trust faltered. Afghan society operated on principles of honor, familial loyalty, and local autonomy that clashed with the hierarchical and centralized assumptions of British administrators. Lessons learned from the First Anglo-Afghan War echoed in the corridors of power. Yet practical understanding was harder to achieve than academic knowledge. Despite these obstacles, the British launched offensives, capturing key cities and attempting to install rulers favorable to their cause. Yet victories were often temporary, fragile, and costly. Every captured city could be abandoned in weeks, every garrison threatened by local uprisings. The war became not just a military struggle, but a test of endurance, logistics, and cultural comprehension. Soldiers, many thousands removed from home, faced isolation, extreme weather, disease, and the constant uncertainty of an elusive enemy. Through it all, Afghan resilience remained undeniable. Tribes coordinated across regions, sometimes cooperating with neighbors, sometimes independently resisting. Leaders emerged whose tactical insight and understanding of the land outmatched even seasoned British commanders. Battles, ambushes, and negotiations all reflected a society that refused to yield to foreign domination. The Second Anglo-Afghan War, like its predecessor, reinforced the stark reality that Afghanistan was no ordinary battleground, was a land where empires came to be tested, humbled, and often defeated. Even as cannon fire echoed across valleys and regiments marched through snow, the essence of Afghan resistance persisted, a commitment to self-determination and a profound understanding of their terrain. For the British, it was a campaign marked by both tactical ingenuity and strategic frustration, a reminder that might alone was insufficient against a people united by culture, loyalty, and geography. As this chapter of Afghanistan's story drew to a close, the lessons were clear. Power could enter the land, but it could not stay unchallenged. Every victory carried the seeds of future difficulty. Every negotiation was fragile, and every step forward was measured against the enduring spirit of the Afghan people. The Second Anglo-Afghan War solidified a narrative that would echo for centuries. The land could be mapped, armies could march, yet conquest remained elusive. The mountains of Afghanistan, silent witnesses to centuries of invasion and resistance, have once again become the stage for a dramatic clash of power. In the late 20th century, the Soviet Union, driven by a desire to expand its influence, marched into Afghanistan with the confidence of a superpower. Tanks, artillery, and thousands of troops poured into the valleys and passes, certain that this time conquest would succeed where so many others had failed. They believed their modern military machine could tame this wild land. But the echoes of history lingered in those mountains. Afghanistan's terrain, a fortress of rock and ice, remained as formidable as ever, and its people, hardened by generations of defending their homeland, met the Soviet advance with a fierce, unyielding determination. What the Soviets saw as a straightforward military operation quickly became a quagmire. Across the country, remote villages transformed into hidden strongholds. The towering mountains and treacherous passes became natural fortresses. The Afghan fighters, known as the Mujahideen, possessed an intimate knowledge of every ridge, every cave, and every hidden trail. This gave them an advantage that no amount of Soviet firepower could overcome. Conventional armies trained for open battlefields found themselves facing an enemy they couldn't see. It's an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere at once. The Mujahideen, armed with courage and a deep connection to their land, unleashed a relentless guerrilla campaign. They struck at night, launching daring raids on Soviet outposts before melting back into the darkness. They set ambushes in narrow passes, turning the Soviets' own supply routes into deadly traps. Their tactics were simple but brutally effective: hit and run, strike, and disappear. For the disciplined Soviet units, accustomed to large-scale, organized warfare, this was a new and terrifying kind of conflict. They struggled to adapt to an enemy that defied all conventional military logic, an enemy that struck without warning and vanished just as suddenly. The war took a heavy toll. The human cost mounted on both sides. Soldiers and fighters alike endured brutal winters, the spread of disease, and the constant strain of exhaustion. Yet, despite the immense hardship, the Afghan resistance never faltered. The Soviets might control the cities or the main roads during the day, but the countryside, the true heart of the nation, remained defiantly out of their grasp. Every inch of ground they gained was met with incredible ingenuity and courage, reinforcing the age-old lesson: this land could not be dominated by an outside force. As the conflict dragged on, Afghanistan became a powerful symbol of struggle against overwhelming odds. The resilience of its people and the strategic advantage of its terrain created a war that stretched for nearly a decade. It became a draining, brutal conflict that sapped the Soviet Union of its resources, its manpower, and its political will. The world watched as this distant, mountainous country became the ultimate proving ground, a place where the limits of a superpower were tested and exposed. Through all the turmoil and destruction, it was the Afghan spirit, unyielding, resourceful, and deeply connected to the land, that emerged as the decisive force. Despite the scale and sophistication of the Soviet military machine, the mountains held secrets that only the Afghans could command. Every ambush, every tactical withdrawal, and every village that refused to surrender added another chapter to an enduring legend. A legend that had been written in the blood of invaders for centuries. A legend that gave this land its formidable name: Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires. Join us as we continue to explore this incredible story. If you found this journey through history compelling, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who might be interested, and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll be sure not to miss the next chapter in this epic saga of resistance and resilience. Thank you for watching. The rugged, scarred lands of Afghanistan have long been a crucible of conflict, a place where empires come to test their might and often find their limits. In the late 20th century, This ancient terrain became the epicenter of a new, fierce resistance. As the formidable Red Army of the Soviet Union rolled into Afghanistan, aiming to secure control over its cities and vital mountain passes, they were met not with a standing army, but with something far more elusive and deeply rooted in the land itself. This was the dawn of the Mujahideen uprising. In secret, across countless valleys and remote villages, Afghan fighters began to organize. They weren't a conventional army. They were farmers, herders, students, and clerics, united by a common cause. Drawing upon centuries of ancestral wisdom passed down through generations on how to survive and fight in this unforgiving landscape, they prepared to confront a superpower. Their strategy wasn't about matching the Soviets tank for tank or plane for plane. It was a war of wits, of agility, and of unyielding courage. These fighters moved like ghosts through the narrow, winding valleys that crisscrossed the country. They would vanish into a network of caves or melt into the high, jagged ridges, only to reappear when least expected. Their targets were the arteries of the Soviet war machine, vulnerable supply convoys snaking through mountain passes, isolated communication hubs, and remote military outposts. Every ambush, every raid was a carefully calculated blow, a powerful message sent to the invaders. This land and its people would never be tamed by foreign control. The war was turning into a deadly game of cat and mouse, but here, the mouse knew every crack and crevice of the terrain. The strength of the Mujahideen wasn't just in their combat skills. It was woven into the very fabric of Afghan society. An intricate support network built on unshakable tribal loyalties and deep-seated cultural bonds sustained the resistance. Villagers, often at great personal risk, provided the fighters with food, shelter, and, most importantly, intelligence. They were the eyes and ears of the uprising, tracking Soviet movements and warning of impending operations. This synergy between the fighters and the local populace was something the Soviets could never replicate or fully comprehend. The Afghan terrain itself became a formidable weapon in the hands of the resistance. Rivers that swelled into impassable torrents, mountains that offered endless hiding places, and hidden goat paths known only to locals were as crucial to their strategy as any rifle or rocket-propelled grenade. The Mujahideen didn't just fight in the mountains, they fought asterisk with asterisk the mountains. In stark contrast, the Soviet army found itself bogged down, constrained by its heavy machinery and rigid top-down tactics that were ill-suited for this environment. Their tanks were confined to the roads, their helicopters were vulnerable in the high altitudes, and their soldiers were strangers in a strange and hostile land. As the conflict intensified, Afghanistan became the world's foremost classroom for asymmetric warfare. It was a brutal, real-world demonstration of how small, highly motivated groups of fighters could challenge and destabilize a technologically superior military force. The Mujahideen proved that willpower, local knowledge, and sheer resilience could often be more decisive than advanced weaponry. Every Soviet offensive, no matter how massive, was met with tenacious resistance. Every town they captured and every valley they cleared was a temporary victory. The moment their patrols withdrew, the resistance would seep back in. The countryside remained defiant, a constant, bloody reminder that even the mightiest of empires had its limits, especially in this legendary graveyard of empires. The stories that emerged from these years of conflict became the stuff of legend. Tales of incredible bravery, ingenious strategy, and profound sacrifice were whispered from village to village, echoing through the mountains and valleys. Every corner of Afghanistan, from the Panjshir Valley to the deserts of the south, bore witness to acts of defiance that would inspire not just a generation of Afghans, but resistance movements across the globe. The Mujahideen uprising was far more than a series of military engagements. It was a powerful testament to a people's unwavering determination to defend their homeland, their traditions, and their right to self-determination against overwhelming odds. The long-term consequences of this struggle were immense and far-reaching. The war didn't just bleed the Soviet Union of resources and morale, contributing to its eventual collapse. It also fundamentally reshaped Afghanistan's internal political landscape. The conflict empowered local commanders, fragmented authority, and set the stage for the civil war that would follow the Soviet withdrawal. Furthermore, the global geopolitics of the Cold War were profoundly altered. The conflict drew in outside powers, turning Afghanistan into a proxy battlefield where the fates of nations were decided. The legacy of this era is complex and enduring, cementing Afghanistan's reputation as a land where foreign armies tread at their peril, and where the spirit of resistance is as timeless as the mountains themselves. Thank you for joining us on this journey into a pivotal moment in modern history. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button. Subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shaped our world, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious. After the last Soviet tank rolled out of Afghanistan, a deep sigh of relief might have been expected. But what followed was not peace. Instead, the country was left like a shattered mirror, each piece reflecting a different faction, a different ambition. The cities, scarred by years of sieges, and the countryside, reshaped by guerrilla warfare, became the chessboard for a new, devastating game. The power vacuum left by the Soviets was filled almost instantly, not by a unified government, but by the very Mujahideen commanders who had fought shoulder to shoulder to expel them. Their common enemy was gone, and now they turned their guns on each other. This was the beginning of the Afghan Civil War, a brutal and chaotic period where alliances shifted like desert sands. Former brothers-in-arms became bitter rivals, vying for control over territories, trade routes, and the remnants of the state. Imagine a landscape where your neighbor from yesterday could be your enemy tomorrow. Warlords carved out their own fiefdoms, running cities and entire districts as personal kingdoms. For the ordinary Afghan, life became a lottery of survival. The front line wasn't a distant line on a map. It could be the next street over. Families were displaced, communities torn apart, and a pervasive sense of fear and uncertainty hung heavy in the air. The very leaders who were meant to rebuild the nation were instead dismantling it, piece by bloody piece. The capital, Kabul, became the epicenter of this conflict. It was a prize coveted by all. Different factions shelled the city relentlessly, reducing vibrant neighborhoods to rubble. People who had survived the Soviet war now found themselves trapped in a far more intimate and terrifying conflict. They navigated a world where loyalty was a currency that could be bought, sold, or betrayed at a moment's notice. Yet, even in the depths of this despair, the Afghan spirit of resilience shone through. People found ways to adapt, to protect their families, to hold on to a sliver of normalcy amidst the madness. They rebuilt what they could, shared what little they had, and clung to the hope that one day the fighting would end. This period of civil war was a profound tragedy, a chapter where Afghanistan's struggle turned inward, pitting its own people against each other. From the ashes of this chaos, a new force emerged, one that would dramatically alter the course of Afghan history. They were known as the Taliban, a word that simply means students. Originating from religious schools or madrasas, in southern Afghanistan and across the border in Pakistan, they presented themselves as a solution to the country's endless conflict. They tapped into a deep well of popular frustration. People were exhausted by the corruption, the violence, and the cruelty of the warlords. The Taliban offered a simple, powerful promise: order. They vowed to end the infighting, disarm the militias, and restore a sense of security based on their strict interpretation of Islamic law. Their rise was astonishingly swift. Beginning in the southern city of Kandahar in 1994, they swept across the country. One by one, warlord-controlled territories fell. Their success wasn't just due to military strength, was also fueled by a population desperate for any alternative to the civil war. When the Taliban entered a town, they often disarmed the local gunmen and put an end to the extortion and crime that had plagued daily life. For many, this was a welcome change. They weren't just a militia. They were a movement that projected an image of moral purity and incorruptibility. A stark contrast to the warlords they were replacing. By 1996, they had done what many thought impossible. They captured Kabul, sending the warring factions of the previous government fleeing to the north. With Kabul under their control, the Taliban established the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. They set about imposing their vision of an ideal Islamic society. This meant enforcing strict social codes that dramatically changed public life. Men were required to grow beards, and women were largely confined to their homes, required to wear the burqa in public, and barred from education and most forms of employment. Music, television, and other forms of entertainment were banned. Their goal was to create a society purified of what they saw as foreign and corrupting influences. While their rule brought a degree of stability and ended the widespread street fighting, it also came at a tremendous cost to personal freedom and human rights, particularly for women and minorities. The Taliban's rise, however, did not mean the end of all conflict. In the north of the country, the old Mujahideen commanders, the very ones who had fought each other over Kabul, now found a new common enemy. They united to form the Northern Alliance, a resistance front dedicated to opposing Taliban rule, supported by various international powers who were wary of the Taliban's extremism. The Northern Alliance continued to wage a guerrilla war from their strongholds in the Panjshir Valley and other parts of the north. So, while the Taliban controlled most of the country, Afghanistan remained a nation at war, divided and contested. The land that had repelled foreign empires now faced a deep internal schism, a battle for its very soul. Internationally, the Taliban's government was largely isolated. Only a handful of countries, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, officially recognized their regime. The rest of the world watched with a mixture of condemnation and concern, especially as Afghanistan became a sanctuary for international extremist groups. This period highlighted a recurring theme in Afghanistan's story: the complex interplay between internal dynamics and external forces. The country's trajectory was being shaped not only by its own leaders and people, but also by the interests and ideologies of regional and global powers. The civil war and the subsequent rise of the Taliban were not simply an Afghan affair. They were part of a much larger geopolitical tapestry. Looking back, this era reveals a profound truth about Afghanistan. Its struggles have never been just about fighting foreign invaders. They have also been deeply internal, a contest between competing visions for the nation's future. It's a conflict between tradition and modernity, between different interpretations of faith, and between the desire for centralized authority and the reality of regional power. The resilience of the Afghan people, their ability to endure and adapt through unimaginable hardship, remains a constant thread in this complex history. The story of the Civil War and the Taliban's rise is not just a prelude to the events that would follow in the 21st century. It is a critical chapter that helps us understand the enduring challenges and the unbreakable spirit of this incredible nation. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into a pivotal moment in Afghanistan's history. It's a complex subject, and I appreciate you taking the time to learn with me. If you found this video informative, please give it a thumbs up. And do you forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the pages of history. See you next time. In the wake of the devastating September 11th attacks, the world's gaze turned with piercing intensity towards Afghanistan. This rugged ancient land, once a crossroads of empires, was now seen as the epicenter of a new global threat. The United States, reeling and resolute, mobilized its immense military power. The mission was clear: dismantle the terrorist networks responsible for the attacks and remove their protectors. The Taliban regime from power. Operation Enduring Freedom was launched. The night skies over Afghanistan lit up with a flash of precision strikes. Special forces teams inserted deep behind enemy lines, linking up with local anti-Taliban militias. Airborne troops descended from the heavens. A coalition of international forces joined the campaign, marking the beginning of a new, complex, and protracted chapter in Afghanistan's long, turbulent history. The initial phase of the war was shockingly swift. The Taliban's conventional forces crumbled under the weight of overwhelming air power and coordinated ground assaults. Major cities like Kabul, Kandahar, and Mazar-e-Sharif fell one after another. It felt like a decisive victory, a swift and just retribution. But in Afghanistan, battlefield victories are often just the preface to a much longer, more complicated story. The very geography of Afghanistan, which has defied conquerors for centuries, began to assert itself. The country's formidable mountain passes, its hidden, winding valleys, and its countless remote villages became the new battleground. This terrain, steeped in a history of resistance, offered a natural advantage to those who knew it best. The Taliban, though defeated in open battle, were not destroyed. They melted away, dispersing into the countryside they knew so well. From the shadows, a new kind of war emerged. The Taliban adapted, trading conventional battles for classic guerrilla tactics. They blended seamlessly with the civilian population, making them an elusive and unpredictable foe. Roadside bombs, ambushes, and targeted assassinations became their weapons of choice. Every patrol, every supply convoy, every interaction with the local populace was fraught with danger. The clear lines of the initial invasion blurred into a murky, frustrating insurgency. While the military conflict raged, a parallel struggle was underway. The battle to rebuild a nation shattered by decades of war. International aid poured into the country, billions of dollars earmarked for reconstruction, governance, and security. New schools and hospitals were built. A new constitution was written, and democratic elections were held. There was a palpable sense of hope, a belief that Afghanistan could be transformed into a stable, modern state. But this grand project of nation-building collided with the complex realities of Afghan society. The country was not a blank slate. Deep-seated tribal loyalties, ancient customs, and fierce regional rivalries often superseded any allegiance to a new central government in Kabul. Warlords, who had been allies in the fight against the Taliban, now vied for power and influence, complicating efforts to establish the rule of law. Corruption became a crippling problem, siphoning away vital resources and eroding public trust. Afghanistan found itself caught in a painful limbo, suspended between the promise of a brighter future and the persistent, violent realities of its present. Amid this turmoil, the incredible courage and resilience of the Afghan people shone through. For ordinary Afghans, life became a constant balancing act. They navigated the dangers of the insurgency, the promises and failures of the reconstruction effort, and the often confusing presence of foreign troops. Communities rebuilt their homes and their lives. Children, especially girls who had been denied an education under the Taliban, flocked to newly opened schools. A vibrant and free press emerged. And a new generation of Afghans began to dream of a different future for their country. These local stories of resilience were a powerful counter-narrative to the headlines of violence and instability. Every marketplace that reopened, every field that was replanted, every local council meeting that took place was an act of defiance against the chaos. It was in these small, everyday acts that the true spirit of Afghanistan was most evident. The Afghan people proved, time and again, their capacity to endure, adapt, and hold on to hope in the face of unimaginable hardship. The conflict in Afghanistan also had profound global implications. It became the longest war in American history, shaping the foreign policy of a generation. The presence of international forces transformed local skirmishes into events of global significance, scrutinized by media from around the world. The war raised difficult questions about the nature of modern warfare, the limits of military power, and the challenges of intervention and nation-building in the 21st century. Afghanistan became a living laboratory for counterinsurgency theory, and the lessons learned there, both successes and failures, would influence military doctrine for years to come. As the years turned into a decade, and then two, the echoes of history grew louder. The challenges faced by the United States and its allies were eerily similar to those faced by the British in the 19th century and the Soviets in the 20th. The mountains and valleys that had swallowed foreign armies before seemed to be doing so again. The complex web of tribal and ethnic loyalties that had confounded invaders for centuries remained as intricate as ever. The indomitable spirit of resistance, honed over generations of fighting outsiders, proved impossible to extinguish. No amount of advanced technology, no military strategy, however sophisticated, could guarantee absolute control over this land and its people. The story of the U.S.-led intervention became another chapter in a long and familiar book. It was a stark and humbling reminder of why Afghanistan has earned its formidable nickname, the Graveyard of Empires. A land where the ambitions of great powers are so often humbled by the enduring power of history, geography, and the unyielding will of its people. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this exploration of modern history insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shape our world. We'll see you in the next one. Have you ever wondered why Afghanistan is called the Graveyard of Empires? For centuries, this land has seen powerful armies march in, only to be swallowed by its rugged terrain and the unbreakable spirit of its people. In the early 21st century, this story continued, but with a new, complex chapter. Let's delve into the endless battles that have defined modern Afghanistan. The turn of the millennium didn't bring peace. Instead, it plunged Afghanistan into another intense period of conflict. This wasn't a simple war between two sides. It was a dizzying maze of foreign troops, local militias, and various insurgent groups, all with their own agendas. The country became a chessboard where regional powers played out their rivalries. Alliances shifted like desert sands, and ancient tribal loyalties often decided who fought whom. The fighting wasn't just in the headlines or major cities. It was happening in remote valleys, across treacherous mountain passes, and in small, strategic towns that you've probably never heard of. International forces arrived with overwhelming firepower and advanced technology drones, satellite imagery, and armored vehicles. They brought organized campaigns and clear military objectives. But Afghanistan has a way of leveling the playing field. The very land itself, the mountains, the caves, the narrow passes became a formidable opponent. It favored those who knew its secrets, those who had grown up in its shadow. Think about it. A high-tech army can control a road during the day, but at night, the terrain belongs to those who can navigate it on foot in the dark. A strategic outpost might seem secure, but it's surrounded by mountains that offer endless cover for an ambush. The geography wasn't just a backdrop for the war. It was an active participant. Roads weren't just for transport. It were lifelines and potential death traps. Every hill and every valley was a stage where strategy, endurance, and local knowledge battled it out. This was a war where a centuries-old understanding of the land could be more valuable than a billion-dollar weapon system. And what about the Afghan people? They weren't just bystanders watching the conflict unfold. They were living in the middle of it every single day. Imagine trying to run a market, send your kids to school, or tend to your farm while military operations and insurgent attacks are a constant threat. Life had to go on, but it did so under a perpetual shadow of uncertainty. This constant state of alert forged an incredible resilience, a strength born from generations of navigating struggle. Every community, every village, held its own stories of survival and quiet resistance. They had to learn how to navigate the complex loyalties and dangers. Who could they trust? The foreign soldiers offering aid, the local warlord promising protection, the insurgents claiming to fight for tradition. These were impossible choices made daily. The resilience of the Afghan people wasn't passive. It was an active, ongoing effort to maintain their lives, their culture, and their dignity amidst the chaos. Their endurance was a quiet force, shaping the nation's character even as battles raged around them. This era highlighted a crucial truth about conflict in Afghanistan. Victories are almost always temporary. A town captured by one force could be lost weeks later. A strategic gain could be reversed by a sudden counterattack. The cycle was relentless. Engagement, withdrawal, and resurgence. It seemed no single power, no matter how formidable, could achieve a decisive, lasting victory. Every military advance was met with a counteraction. Every grand strategy was tested and often broken by the realities on the ground. This constant push and pull reinforced the idea that subduing Afghanistan is an almost impossible task. Why? Because the conflict was never just about military might. It was a battle of ideologies, of cultures, and of political wills. The Afghan people's determination to protect their identity, their autonomy, and their way of life has always been the most constant and powerful force in the region. Foreign interventions, regardless of their intentions, consistently hit a wall when faced with this deep-rooted desire for independence. This isn't to glorify conflict, but to understand its nature in this unique land. The endless battles were more than just military statistics. They were a raw expression of a nation's enduring spirit. They were a testament to a land that has a history of challenging outsiders, and a powerful reminder of the limits of power when it confronts history, terrain, and the collective determination of a people. So when we hear the phrase "graveyard of empires," it's not just a dramatic nickname. It's a summary of centuries of history. It speaks to a land that refuses to be tamed and a people whose resilience has been forged in the crucible of endless conflict. The story of modern Afghanistan is a complex, often tragic, but ultimately powerful lesson about the nature of war, the strength of the human spirit, and why some places can never truly be conquered. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this exploration of history insightful, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into the events that shape our world. We'll see you in the next one. Afghanistan, a land of soaring peaks and secluded valleys, has for centuries been a stage for the ambitions of empires. Time and again, invaders have marched into its territory, brimming with confidence, armed with superior technology and driven by visions of conquest. Yet just as consistently, the rugged, unforgiving terrain and the fierce resilience of the Afghan people have turned dreams of dominance into desperate struggles for survival. This isn't just history. It's a timeless story of endurance. From the ancient Persians and Greeks to the mighty British Empire in the 19th century. From the Soviet Union's powerful Red Army to the modern, technologically advanced US-led coalition, Afghanistan has defied outsiders in ways few other nations ever have. Each wave of conflict has carved deep scars into the land and its society, testing the very limits of military power. But through it all, one thing has remained constant: the unyielding spirit of the Afghan people, a golden thread connecting generations past, present, and future. When we look closely at this long and turbulent history, a distinct pattern begins to emerge. Victories for foreign powers were almost always fleeting, like shadows at dusk. The initial successes would inevitably give way to a grueling, seemingly endless war of attrition. Control over the cities never translated into control over the vast, wild countryside. The mountains became impenetrable fortresses for local fighters. The narrow valleys turned into deadly traps. And the people themselves became masters of guerrilla warfare, turning their intimate knowledge of the land into a formidable weapon. Afghanistan was never just a piece of land to be conquered on a map. It became a proving ground, a harsh, unforgiving crucible that tested military strategies, political will, and the very essence of human resilience. The world learned, often the hard way, that overwhelming force was not enough. The country's complex tapestry of tribal loyalties, ethnic diversity, and deep-seated traditions proved far more difficult to navigate than any mountain pass. This is why the name Graveyard of Empires resonates so powerfully. It's not just a dramatic title, it's a summary of centuries of historical truth. It speaks not necessarily to the weakness of the invaders, but to the extraordinary strength, ingenuity, and unbreakable will of a nation that has consistently refused to be subdued. It's a profound reminder that true, lasting influence cannot be imposed by force. It requires understanding, respect, and a humility that great powers have often lacked when they crossed the Hindu Kush. Think about the British Empire at the zenith of its power. It fought 3 separate wars in Afghanistan, suffering humiliating defeats that sent shockwaves across the globe. The First Anglo-Afghan War, in particular, became a cautionary tale of imperial overreach, culminating in the disastrous 1842 retreat from Kabul, where an entire army was annihilated. The lesson was stark. Even the world's foremost superpower could be brought to its knees by a decentralized, determined resistance fighting on its own terms. More than a century later, the Soviet Union made the same fateful miscalculation. In 1979, Moscow sent in its formidable military machine to support a friendly communist government, expecting a quick and decisive operation. Instead, they found themselves mired in a brutal, decade-long conflict against the Mujahideen. Supplied and supported by outside powers, these fighters bled the Red Army dry. The war drained the Soviet economy, demoralized its military, and became a significant factor in the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union itself. The graveyard had claimed another victim. And then, in the 21st century, history seemed to echo once more. Following the tragic events of 9/11, United States and its allies entered Afghanistan with the most sophisticated military technology the world had ever seen. They swiftly toppled the Taliban regime. But what followed was a 20-year nation-building effort and counterinsurgency campaign that proved to be an immense, frustrating, and ultimately unwinnable challenge. Despite trillions of dollars spent and countless lives lost, the goal of creating a stable, centralized state that could stand on its own remained elusive. The final chaotic withdrawal in 2021 was a somber testament to the same historical pattern. The mountains and valleys had once again outlasted an empire. So, what is the fundamental lesson here? It's that the story of Afghanistan is a powerful testament to the idea that a people's will to be free is one of the most powerful forces in the world. It's a story written not just in the grand strategies of generals and politicians, but in the everyday courage of ordinary people defending their homes, their culture, and their way of life. Their resilience is a lesson that echoes far beyond the borders of Afghanistan, reminding us that history is shaped as much by the human spirit as it is by armies and empires. As we conclude this journey through centuries of conflict, we honor the millions of Afghans who have lived, struggled, and endured through these tumultuous times. Their stories, often lost in the headlines and history books, are the true heart of this nation's saga. They remind us that behind every geopolitical struggle, there are human beings with hopes, dreams, and an unshakable desire for peace and self-determination. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of history. If you found this journey insightful, please give this video a like, share it with others, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the pivotal moments that have shaped our world. Your support is what allows us to keep telling these important stories. We'll see you in the next one.